In part 7 we looked at how we make decisions, where our emotions come from, and how social holons describe the nature of mental health and mental illness. In this video we're going to look at how social holons explain groupthink. We will see how it is an unavoidable part of human existence. We'll also see how the complex society that we rely on to survive cannot exist without it. Groupthink also comes with great dangers, and we will look at how reflexive thinking can enhance its benefits and mitigate its dangers. In part 6, Holons and Thinking, we looked at this diagram. It shows a person holon with their own centre of consciousness, their thinking pathways and their reflexive self, which we can take to be their decision-making centre. We also talked about reflexive thinking and how an individual chooses what to think about. We are now going to look at a way of representing what groupthink looks like. In the last video we used this diagram to illustrate the consequences of making decisions. There are a number of social holons in this diagram. Besides Harry's body holon, there is the family holon that consists of Harry's holon, his wife's holon, and his daughter's holon. There is also a workplace holon that consists of Harry's holon, his workplace colleague holons, and his workplace manager's holon. In order to understand groupthink, we will concentrate on the workplace holon. Let's draw it out in a slightly different way. So here the people holons with their centres of consciousness are in a circle, and the workplace holon's centre of consciousness is in the middle. Earlier in the series we saw this diagram, representing a person's conscious and subconscious mind. The blue area represents the subconscious mind, things that this individual can possibly bring to mind. And the ovals represent things that a person is consciously thinking about. The purple dot represents the person's decision-making centre, the person's reflexive self. So we just add this detail to our diagram. We now add in the thinking paths from the people to the workplace holon's centre of consciousness. And now we add in the people's connections to the workplace holon's centre of consciousness. In the last video we recognised that in order to maintain its existence and grow, the workplace holon had its own particular point of view about a decision that Harry had to make. The workplace holon had its own point of view on how Harry should behave. Bearing this in mind, we can now see that the workplace holon's centre of consciousness has the same connection to all the people in the workplace. This means that the workplace holon's centre of consciousness has an interest in influencing the decisions of all the people in the workplace. Effectively, the workplace holon has its own agenda. We can illustrate this in the next diagram. Here we have shrunk the boundary of the workplace holon to match the size of the contributory holons. We've moved its centre of consciousness near to the original boundary. At the same time we've marked in the centre of the diagram a purple dot to represent the workplace holon's reflexive self. We have in fact seen this diagram before. It is the diagram that we looked at the beginning of the video, minus its labels. It illustrates a person's holon with their centre of consciousness, their thinking pathways, and their reflexive self. When we put the workplace holon diagram next to this, we see that they have an identical structure. The similarity between human thinking and workplace group thinking is both remarkable and shocking. We see that there is essentially no substantial difference between the two. We need to have a look at the implications of this really shocking discovery. Let's remind ourselves why Harry is a member of this workplace HOLON. It is pretty obvious that it gives him the opportunity of earning money to feed, clothe and shelter himself and his family. He also has personal relationships with colleagues with different skills that he can maybe draw on to help him out, perhaps in difficult times. He gets substantial survival advantages by being a member of this group. And if we want to go back to first principles, then HOLONs want to grow. So Harry's HOLON grows, or at least survives, by being a member of the workplace group HOLON. Exactly the same argument can be made for all the other people in that workplace. They all get similar advantages to Harry. Of course, the workplace HOLON is only one of Harry's group HOLONs. Membership of this group gives him considerable survival advantages. There are many group HOLONs here to which Harry or any of his workplace colleagues could belong. They range in size from a small family group upwards. Of course, not everyone is a member of every group. Individuals subscribe to their own set as opportunities arise. Each individual has their own relationship with their group of HOLONs. Let's have a look at an example. We'll call her Samantha. Samantha's social HOLON mindset could look like this. From just 7 of these group HOLONs, we can surmise a lot about Samantha. They are perhaps a doctor who works for the National Health Service. They live and maybe work in London. They have a close and extended family who are possibly all Methodists. They like to watch football in their spare time and support Manchester United, so possibly they were born or have links to Manchester. These group HOLONs, to a degree, define who this person is, or perhaps more correctly, who they believe they are. Because if, for example, they changed their religion and became a Buddhist, would they be the same person? We would certainly be aware that they were different to how they had been previously. Of course, this is a very sketchy outline of Samantha as a person. To get a better idea of who they are, we would need to know what they think about lots of different ideas. Earlier in the series, we recognized that ideas are HOLONs. Here are just a few from a countless number. Let's examine one. We're going to take the stone axe idea as an example. Let's presume it was the idea of one person. It really was a great idea. The axe could be used for cutting, stripping and hammering, enabling prehistoric peoples to make clothes, strip meat and make better dwellings than otherwise. At first this idea was maybe confined to a tribe, but as more and more people came across the idea, it began to grow and spread. So, top left we have just the stone axe inventor HOLON and the stone axe idea HOLON. Step by step, the idea is passed on to other people who subscribe to that idea. The stone axe idea HOLON grows. Eventually, bottom right, very many people are subscribing to the Stone Age axe idea. We can say that the stone axe is part of their culture. Alternatively, because the stone axe idea HOLON is so powerful, we can say that these people belong to a Stone Age axe culture. Both statements are true. Now, although we have taken the idea of the stone axe as an example, we can describe the growth or non-growth of the idea with this diagram. Let's take language as an example. Top left we have someone who has the idea that a certain sound should in some way represent a certain idea. Even though this is a good idea, it is no use unless he shares this idea with someone else. Not an easy thing to do if you haven't actually invented language. But let's say at some point two people get together and agree that a certain sound or series of sounds means I am going to the river. This communication that allows people to know where they are in relation to each other is very valuable. One can envisage that as other people become aware of this code, they too will subscribe to the idea. Eventually, after inventing many sounds, we can see how a language group HOLON develops. Some HOLON ideas develop much more quickly. Let's take the modern idea that in the UK cars are driven on the left side of the road. This HOLON is very powerful because anyone who does not subscribe to it in the UK is very likely to be killed or injured. We would describe subscribing to this HOLON as having common sense, not perhaps realizing that we are referring to an aspect of group thinking that is very much to our advantage. We can now show a better illustration of Samantha's mindset. The blue area represents the sum of social HOLONs and idea HOLONs that Samantha subscribes to. It represents her subconscious mind. The labelled ovals represent just some of the social HOLONs that Samantha can think about. One would imagine that with all these wonderful idea HOLONs, that Samantha would be a well-balanced person living in a utopia. But given that, like everyone else, she is not, we need to ask this question. What can possibly go wrong? In part 7 of this series, we discovered how our competing social HOLONs can give us a hard time when it comes to making decisions, and how in some cases they can come to dominate a person's mind. But social HOLONs have a more insidious way of dominating human thinking. We need to talk about groupthink. Let's have a look at our diagram illustrating how idea HOLONs grow. We see that they simply grow as the idea spreads. It is important to realize that there is no requirement that any particular idea HOLON needs to be true in order for it to grow into a group social HOLON. Social HOLONs that grow from untrue ideas may grow very large and powerful. Unfortunately, they are still untrue. This simple observation has huge consequences for humanity. Before we look at some case studies, let's have a look at ways in which ideas can be wrong. A common way an idea can be wrong is that it is based on insufficient evidence. So, for instance, in the late 19th and early 20th century, many people believed that there were canals on the planet Mars. This belief arose initially from observations using a telescope with poor resolution. Subsequently, many observations were made by eminent scientists detailing these non-existent canals. Today, we have Martian exploration rovers on the planet's surface, so we know that the idea that there are canals on Mars was incorrect. But the idea that there were canals on Mars lasted for a number of decades, and people who subscribed to that idea believed that they were following the science. Another way ideas can be incorrect is that the ideas are correct, but they are applied outside of their useful limits. So, for instance, in the 1860s, Alfred Nobel invented a way of making controlled explosions that we call dynamite. The idea was to make mining more efficient and save back-breaking human labour. And indeed the invention did exactly what it said on the packet. Dynamite, or its modern equivalents, are still used today to mine minerals. However, the idea of controlled explosions grew enormously and has led to the huge armament industries where bullets, grenades, shells, bombs and missiles are made in huge quantities. Clearly, history has shown that the idea of controlled explosions has in many ways gone well past its usefulness in terms of human well-being. Challenging thought is to consider that the carnage of war can be viewed as a dispute between competing armament industry social holons. From the point of view of both, as long as they grow, then human casualties are merely collateral damage, even though the human casualties are unmitigated disasters for the people involved and their loved ones. Another way in which ideas can be wrong is that it is a spurious idea, invented to fit a predetermined agenda. Or, more simply, the idea is wrong because it is a lie. Some lies, white lies, are relatively harmless. I'm sorry I'm late for work, I was stuck in a traffic jam, rather than I overslept. However, lying can be a very serious matter. At a human level, to avoid being punished, someone may tell a lie to implicate somebody else in a crime that they didn't commit. If the lie is successful, this leads to someone else being unjustly convicted. And at a corporate level, accounts can be falsified to mislead investors. In this case, a corporation holon grows under false pretenses. There may follow a crash where many people lose their money. Let's take the example of a gold rush. Someone finds a gold nugget and becomes rich. People flock to the area assuming there is a gold field. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. The idea is based on insufficient evidence. Let's say that some more gold is found, confirming that there is a gold field. Many more prospectors flock to the area. Some make it rich and some don't. Eventually, the gold starts to become worked out. Even though there is a diminishing amount of gold, ever more people flock to the area, but don't find any gold. The idea of the gold field was correct, but the idea has been extended outside of its useful limits. And finally, when there is virtually no gold left, some people in the area, who are perhaps making their living by providing miners with services such as food, shelter, tools and loans, are likely to support a lie that there is still gold available, even though they know, or at least suspect, that there is no more gold to be found. So now the goldfield idea is a spurious invention, a distortion of reality, supported to fit a predetermined agenda. Of course, all these ways that ideas can be wrong can be combined. So let's look at the downsides of groupthink. It has been known about for centuries. It is responsible for many human disasters in all walks of life. It is worthy of being studied in great depth. We will confine ourselves to illustrating groupthink through a holon perspective. Here, some people with their reflexive selves and their senses of consciousness are represented by the small circles. 4 of these people are members of an idea social holon group, and in line with what we've been talking about earlier, we've shown the boundaries of this group. It can represent any sort of social holon: family, a tribe, a committee, a corporation, a government, any set of individuals. So let's see how groupthink works, and why it is so insidious. We will start by looking at the fairy tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. The Emperor and his entourage are infected with groupthink. When these people consider the question, does the Emperor have fine new clothes, they do not ask the question directly. Their thinking path goes via the Emperor has fine new clothes group HOLON. Unsurprisingly, the answer comes back to them that the Emperor does have fine new clothes. They are, of course, being deceived by a wrong idea group HOLON. We have earlier in the series described this mode of thinking as deflexive thinking. However, the young boy, not part of the group, he asks the question directly, without bias. He can see the reality that the Emperor has no clothes. He is thinking reflexively. His thought pathways are not being deflected by the groupthink. In this fairy tale, when the boy points out the truth of the situation, everyone throws up their hands and laughs, and are amazed to realize how stupid they have been. In real life, it is more likely that to save face the Emperor will have the boy killed, and the groupthink will carry on. Unfortunately, groupthink is not confined to fairy tales. Exactly the same logic can be applied to real-life situations, and there are many cases where groupthink has led to frightful human disasters. We will look at a couple of historical examples. The 16th and 17th centuries in Western Europe were a time when ill fortune was likely to be attributed to supernatural causes, and during that time many women were executed as witches. It seems amazing now that such beliefs could last for years, a couple of 100 years in fact. The authorities at the time even appointed witch-finders. Many of the cases were totally spurious, initiated maliciously as a way of settling scores. And there were ridiculously low standards of evidence applied to the trials. So why did this madness persist for so long? Let's look at a typical trial with the help of a HOLON diagram. The group idea HOLON is that witches can cast spells and are responsible for poor crop yields and illnesses. This idea is rife in the population. Now, poor Farmer Brown had a disastrous crop failure, and soon after he fell ill and died. One of the people in the village accused a woman of being a witch and casting a spell on Farmer Brown. The witch-finder general is brought in to conduct a trial. Why is this poor woman's fate already sealed? Well, the only people willing to think reflexively and see that the woman is not a witch are her family. Everyone else thinks deflexively through the witches can cast spells group HOLON. Certainly the idea was based on insufficient evidence. Wise women with herb lore could indeed treat pains and illnesses, and they did have knowledge of poisons. To suppose that loads of women were serial poisoners with supernatural powers is definitely extending the idea outside of its useful limits. And indeed, there are many spurious reasons why powerful and not so powerful individuals with hidden agendas might support this wrong idea. It is interesting to note that in our example, many of the people supporting the persecution of witches were doing so for what they would consider to be good reasons, for instance, protecting their nearest and dearest. We can see in this example that the growth of an idea HOLON is not based on whether the idea is a good idea or even a true idea. It is very much based on the size of the HOLON involved. It is based on the prevalence of the idea. The more the idea grows, the bigger and more powerful the HOLON becomes, attracting more and more subscribers. So what does the group reflexive self tell the villagers? Maybe it argues, if you do not get rid of this witch, you might be the next one that she curses. If you support this witch, you might be the one accused of being a witch next time. If you don't find her guilty, then your wife might be accused instead. Witches are ungodly and are an abomination. If you do not condemn her, you will lose your place in heaven. You don't like her anyway. And what does the group reflexive self tell the witchfinder general? Maybe, if you start finding witches not guilty, then you will soon find yourself out of a powerful and lucrative job. The powers that be are being accused of overtaxing the people and not allowing farmers to keep back enough seed grain to make a living. The king will have your head if you do not deflect the blame onto the witches. This wrong and totally evil idea was very powerful. If we go back to our list of ways in which ideas can be wrong, we see that there was a perfect storm. In a previous video, we used this diagram to illustrate how to make a rational complex decision. The person making the decision has to think about the many factors involved, as many HOLONs as possible that have a bearing on the decision. Only when the person has considered all the factors available to them and weighed up the pros and cons, weighed up what the competing HOLONs are telling them, can they make a rational, balanced decision. This is very much a description of what we call the scientific method. All factors are thought about and tested, and a final rational decision is arrived at. It is also what Eugene Halliday, in his book Reflexive Self-Consciousness, calls reflexive thinking. We can be pretty hopeful that if people go through this process, then they have a reasonable chance of coming up with a rational, balanced decision. This reflexive way of reaching a decision, though, is obviously hard work and time-consuming. In general, people do not have the time to go through this process to decide about every social HOLON, every belief that they have. To save time and effort, they often think deflexively. They only consider a few, or even just one HOLON. Unfortunately for the poor woman accused of being a witch, scientific reflexive thinking was sadly lacking at the time of her trial and likely execution. Let's have a look at this trial from a judge's point of view. Here is the mindset of a judge coming to a rational decision on whether or not the accused has ruined crops and made people ill. The ovals in this diagram represent just a few of the various parameters, idea HOLONs, that may have an effect on the judge's decision. There are a very large number of these. For example, we could put labels on each oval, such as, was the heavy rain that destroyed the farmer's crops just bad luck? Was this person previously of good character? Do her accusers have any sort of axe to grind against her? And do the king's policies on grain storage have any real bearing on the matter? The blue HOLON represents the crops were ruined by the witch's spell HOLON. Coming to a just decision that the woman is innocent requires reflexively considering all these possibilities and factors. It is very hard work and politically very loaded. So what happens when the witches can cast spells HOLON becomes the dominance HOLON, and the judge is a witchfinder general. The judge's mindset looks totally different, but all we have done is increase the size of the blue witches can cast spells HOLON in relation to the other holons in the Witchfinder's mindset. The Witchfinder is hugely swayed in his decision by this one holon. It dominates all the others. He thinks deflexively. Only the dominant holon is listened to. All the other holons are ignored or at best marginally considered. In this Witches Can Cast Spells culture, the Witchfinder General of course finds that the woman is guilty, so she is condemned and executed. It is unsettling to realise that anyone playing the Witchfinder General's role would come to the same decision. Only when the culture changes, that is, the dominant holon is brought into balance with the other holons, is there any chance of a fair trial. It is interesting to note how closely this illustration is to diagrams in previous videos where we were investigating obsessive mental illnesses. Now, when we look back at historical examples of disastrous groupthink, we tend to have a smug attitude, because with hindsight, being in a different culture, we can see how wrong those ideas were. But have we eliminated disastrous groupthink in our 21st century scientific and technological society? Primarily, we need to remember that the most important factor controlling the growth of a holon and its associated groupthink is the communication of the idea. Since the invention of radio communication, followed by television, and now the almost worldwide use of emails and social media, many ideas can grow at a phenomenal rate. The growth of a good idea is of immense benefit to us. I'm reminded of this fact as I write this script on an amazing computer inside a brightly lit, warm and comfortable house in the middle of a dark and miserable winter. There is also plenty of food in my pantry, fridge and freezer, and there are many group idea social holons that I can thank for this. But we really don't have to search very hard to find modern examples of disastrous groupthink. We still have large financial boom and bust disasters. The subprime mortgage disaster and the failure of Barings Bank come quickly to mind, the easy profit holon being the main driving force in these disasters. The same can be said, and even more so, about the easy profit holon being the driving force for illicit drug dealing. Other factors, holons that are incredibly important that argue against drug dealing, are ignored. For the drug dealer, they are completely overcome by the profit holon. There are also examples of groupthink that are so well hidden in plain sight that we often don't notice them, especially if we are unconsciously subscribing to them. Even when people try to think scientifically and reflexively, they are often misled. Let's have a look at an example of a scientific question and investigate the difference that reflexive and deflexive thinking can make to the outcome of the investigation. We will take as an example of a scientific investigation the question of what controls the temperature of the Earth. The ovals in this diagram represent just a few of the various parameters, idea holons, that may have an effect on the Earth's temperature. Because of the complexity of the issue, there are a very large number of these parameters. For example, we could put labels on each oval holon, such as the electromagnetic radiation coming from the Sun, electromagnetic energy from sunspots and coronal holes, the shape of the Earth's orbit, the tilt of the Earth in relation to the Sun, dust in the atmosphere from volcanoes, interstellar cosmic rays that nucleate clouds, sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere from volcanoes, carbon dioxide from volcanoes, carbon dioxide man-made, water vapour in the atmosphere, the reflectivity of different types of cloud, the total Earth cloud cover, ice cover, and the Earth's albedo, natural ocean and atmospheric cycles, heat from subterranean volcanic activity, and many, many more. Sorting all this out is an enormous ongoing task. In fact, it is so complex that it is debatable whether a definitive answer as to the relative contributions of these factors can ever be reached. However, the main thing we want to note here is that in order to answer this question, the contributions of very many idea holons needs to be carefully considered and their relative contributions accurately determined, in the hope of obtaining a definitive answer. This is a monumental scientific task, requiring especially careful, reflexive thinking. What happens, though, if one of the ideas under investigation becomes the dominant holon? We are looking at a groupthink contaminating reflexive scientific thinking. So now we are looking at a situation where one of the holons in the previous diagram, rightly or wrongly, has become dominant. That is, it is the most powerful persuasive holon, all the possible factor holons. Let's say that this holon has the label changes in the Earth's orbit. People thinking deflexively conclude that the temperature of the Earth is primarily controlled by changes in the Earth's orbit. This indeed is an important factor in ice age cycles. All other factors are considered to be minor and are incompletely considered. Now, as more and more people think about this problem, they will be led into accepting the deflexive argument that changes in the Earth's orbit are the control knob for controlling the Earth's temperature. The changes in the Earth's orbit holon becomes an even bigger group holon. It has continuous new subscribers. As the idea spreads, it is not long before people are living in a change in the Earth's orbit control the temperature of the Earth culture. There is much talk of Milankovitch cycles and the history of ice ages. In a scientific culture, however, there are always some reflexive thinkers who continue to look at other factors. One of the possible contributory factors having an effect on global temperature is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In recent years, this has become by far the most dominant holon in the what controls the temperature of the Earth debate. This holon is incredibly large. We said earlier that the size of a holon depends only upon the prevalence of the idea. And because modern electronic intercontinental communication are so efficient, the number of subscribers to this dominant holon is vast. Now, we have already seen that there is no incumbency for a dominant holon to be true. We are currently living in a man-made carbon dioxide controls the temperature of the Earth culture. It has resulted from a tremendously powerful holon, far more powerful than, say, the Stone Age axe holon or the witches can cast spells holon. So, are we presently using erroneous deflexive thinking on a worldwide basis? Unfortunately, this is not just an academic question. The carbon dioxide controls the temperature of the Earth culture suggests that we can prevent the temperature of the Earth rising by reducing concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This conclusion, however, could be seriously flawed, as it is the result of deflexive thinking rather than scientific reflexive thinking. If future reflexive thinking using unbiased scientific thinking ultimately shows that man-made carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is not the control knob for the Earth's temperature, it may come too late to mitigate likely disastrous policy mistakes. Our complex industrial technological civilization that supports the present human population on the Earth relies vastly on energy from carbon dioxide producing fuels. Moving too quickly away from these fuels as a result of a panic driven by deflexive thinking may prove extremely ill-advised. It is easy to see from this example that in our modern era of mass communication, the prevalence of groupthink and its associated dangers is likely to be higher than in times gone by. Of course, we must not forget that there are many good idea holons that grow and provide us with riches that previous generations could barely dream of. But in the holon model of groupthink, great riches come with great dangers. We need to be aware of those dangers. So how can we minimize the dangers of groupthink? First, tell everyone you know about groupthink and its dangers. People need to be aware that groupthink really exists. Few people are aware that it does, and so they are completely blind to its potential disastrous consequences. Point out how important it is for everyone to look at lots of different viewpoints about something before making their minds up about it. It is important to encourage people to investigate viewpoints they would not usually look at. This is hard because it is much easier for people to just read and listen to their favourite point of view. This sort of research is known as confirmation bias and plays right into the hands of groupthink. Explain to people how their individual decisions really matter. Most people believe that what they think about something doesn't matter. But in a holon world, everyone's opinion matters. They are choosing how big a particular idea gets. Promote freedom of speech. Everyone must be able to express their opinion. Some people's opinions will be biased, based on deflexive thinking. But in free open debate, viewpoints based on reflexive thinking will win arguments. Open debate is a lesser risk to truth-finding than the censorship of minority opinions that may turn out to be correct. Call out unchallenged ideas that are constantly promoted by mass media and social media. In our high-tech media-driven society, it is all too easy for news outlets and social media platforms to become groupthink hubs. It is all too easy for mainstream media to promote particular points of view. Mass media owners and journalists alike should be well informed about the dangers of groupthink, because they have such a major influence on individual opinions. They have great power to grow the holons they support, but there is no guarantee that these opinions are correct, especially if those opinions are already a product of groupthink. Tell them to be wary of populist ideas, even those held by their circle of friends. This is a difficult one. We all like to be in tune with our friends, and most people go along with popular deflexive ideas. But what do you do if you think reflexively and you find that you no longer subscribe to a particular idea? A lot will depend on circumstances. Ideally, you have a debate with your friends and convince them with reflexive thinking to accept your new point of view. If this does not seem possible, then maybe just bring out the point that populist ideas, no matter how good they seem, have a good chance of being wrong. Call for an education system that stresses how to think rather than what to think. Too often our education system, because of targets, large curricula, and shortages of time, teach deflexively. It is demanded that pupils learn certain chosen facts, and their success depends upon them being able to regurgitate said facts. This is little more than promoting social Holon groupthink. Of course, a great deal of what is taught is correct and valuable. However, this approach to education leaves pupils and students woefully unprepared to carry out critical thinking. And after decades of deflexive teaching, we are in danger of having a population lacking these critical skills and being wide open to social Holon manipulation. This defect in education needs urgent correction. People need to be aware that they are decision makers and that their decisions matter. If they subscribe to unthought out ideas, then they help grow dangerous monocultures of thinking. In contrast, if they think reflexively, they are far more likely to reach well-balanced decisions, and we can all develop cultures that we can be proud to live in. In the next video, we will look at how universal awareness relates to the concepts of incarnate and discarnate centers of consciousness.